Welcome everyone from Murphy to Manteo, the podcast of the Highway 64 project at Elon University, a collaboration between the Professional Writing and Rhetoric program and the Department of Environmental Studies. In the Highway 64 project, we explore North Carolina through the lens of culture, food, community, sustainability, and climate resiliency. Highway 64, our North Carolina heritage highway, stands as our metaphor for the diversity of peoples, places, and bioregions that is North Carolina. Join us as we travel the state, talk with interesting people, and explore thought-provoking ideas.
Welcome, everybody, to From Murphy to Manteo, the podcast from the Highway 64 project from Elon University. This is a collaboration between environmental studies at Elon and professional writing and rhetoric. I am Michael Strickland, the director of the Center for Environmental Studies, and I teach in environmental studies and in professional writing. Our podcast is about the Highway 64 project, where we traverse North Carolina, looking at all the different diverse aspects of culture, community, and climate resilience. Today, our guest is Morgan Brinkle from Visit Lexington, NC. And we have our trusty crew here, Olivia, who is our podcast producer, and Caden, project manager for the Highway 64 podcast. I'm going to hand it over to them to get our podcast started today.
Hello, I'm Caden. I work with both the environmental studies and the professional writing crew. I'm the person who runs the website at this moment, and I have been working on this for the past 2.5 years.
I'm Olivia. I'm the executive producer of the podcast, and I just started this semester, so really excited to talk to all of the different guests. And before we get into sort of like the nitty-gritty of Lexington, Morgan, would you be able to give the audience a bit of like a brief background on yourself? Because I know I talked to a lot of the people that went and visited Lexington a couple weeks ago. I was told that, you originally started working at Children's Vineyard and then you started working at Visit Lexington. So if you could talk about a little bit about that yourself and sort of the ultimate mission of Visit Lexington and who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys so much for having me. Yeah, my journey here in Lexington got started at Children's Vineyards. But even before that, I've always kind of been involved in tourism and hospitality in some aspect. I'm originally from Asheville, North Carolina, and everyone knows that they have seen a huge tourism firsthand, growing up in Asheville, and then immediately wanted to hit the ground running there and get involved with that. So I did my internship and then worked with the Biltmore Wine Company with the Biltmore Estate, and really learned a lot about the tourism industry and hospitality, and really just fell in love with the industry there. And there came a time I was at Biltmore for about 4 years and was ready just to move on to something new, and wanted to stay in the wine and hospitality portion of tourism. And there was a marketing position open at Children's Vineyards in Lexington. So I took that, knowing its connection with not only wine, but with Lexington and Richard Childress Racing, and their, monument here that they have here in Lexington. And in my time there, I did marketing for about 4 years. And I really got to know the previous Lexington tourism director, my predecessor. And when she retired, the opportunity came available here, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and like you were saying, since you've been in Lexington for so long, do you think you could tell us a little bit about the cultural identity of Lexington? We all know about the Lexington Barbecue Festival, but are there other events that you've helped out with? And I know that there's a Christmas event coming up, and just anything like that. What else makes Lexington stand out?
Absolutely. Well, I think one of the key points of Lexington is its central location in the state, first and foremost. We always say we're 3 hours to the mountains, 3 hours to the coast. So I really love the central location of Lexington. And then too, talking about the identity of Lexington, one of the very first things I noticed coming here is I've had the luxury of seeing Lexington both as a visitor and then now as a resident for about 10 years now. And so one of the first things I noticed when I moved here was just how much of a small town that it really was. And coming from Asheville and seeing that, it was a little bit of a culture shock, but in a really good way. I appreciated the small hometown feel and the warmth that Lexington offered. And that was offered to me as a guest, as a visitor, upon my first impression of coming here. And now that I live here, you still feel that every single day. And I think that's a really key point in hospitality and tourism, is your first impression of a place and how a place makes you feel. So with the identity, I tell everybody, we're a small town, but along with that, we're not a ghost town. And there's a very big difference with that. Even though we have those small town vibes and feels, we have something for everybody. And there is something going on every night of the week year round. So I think that's a big part of our identity. And I think we try to really portray that through Tourism Authority here in Lexington. Telling people, yes, come see us. We have things going on. We're on the
Mhm.
map.
Yeah.
But also you're going to get that small town friendliness, that small town hospitality, and that welcoming invitation as well.
Yeah, Morgan, one of the things that I really appreciate about Lexington is that sense of small town community feel to it. And I think you folks have done such a great job in maintaining the integrity of your small town. It still feels like a small downtown from 50, 70 years ago.
Yeah, nostalgia, I use that word a lot. That's a big part of our brand and identity. You can have growth and development in a town. You want to grow and see that. But at the same time, I think a lot of people, especially in this day and time, in a digital and very commercial world that we live in, people are constantly seeking just, a feel good, nostalgic place to visit. And I think when
Right.
people here, they do get a sense of that nostalgia and a sense of yesteryear in a really good way.
Well, could you, kind of shifting gears a little bit, could you talk about some of the changes that you've seen in Lexington, the kind of the things that have impacted the town, both pre and post COVID, impacts of the up and down economy, and how Lexington has kind of maintained its footing, and for at least from my perspective, has kind of prospered in all of that.
Yeah, we really have. And, whenever there's big events, whether it's cultural or geographical or economical, whatever large events take place, I do feel like small towns are sometimes the ones that are hit the worst or hit
Yeah,
first.
yeah,
But in that same real sense, they're the ones that always come together and show a true sense of unity. And I think we really saw that during COVID. Not only did travel and tourism was obviously very much affected during that time, but honestly, even though we saw some struggles, especially with some of our smaller merchants and our mom and pop shops, trying to make ends meet, we also kind of did okay during
hmm
COVID. One of the good things about being a small town and not being very populated or being a very, very popular big city or destination is travelers and people, once they were comfortable going out, they weren't seeking out large cities,
right,
places that were shoulder to shoulder people.
hmm
So they were seeking out small towns like Lexington, North Carolina. And
yeah,
we actually did okay during COVID, a lot better than some would anticipate.
yeah, yeah,
So that was okay. And then, our big industry of barbecue here, they already offered curbside, which is one of the things that they're known to be famous for. So really, there wasn't that big of an adjustment for the barbecue restaurants. They just shifted completely over to curbside pickup and drive in, and business was as usual. So honestly, we did okay during COVID. Coming out of that, we had some businesses close, especially on our Main Street uptown side of things. Now that we're about 5 years past that, we are seeing more and more occupancy of those vacant buildings. So that's a very good progress and a very
yeah.
good positive thing to see.
That's very good. Every time I come to Lexington, I learn a new factoid. When I took my class down to the barbecue center last week, we were interviewing Michael, the owner, and one of the things he said, it was just a random question from one of the students in talking about the differences between down east, low country, North Carolina barbecue and Lexington style barbecue. And he was talking about the open pit cooking entire hogs versus, Lexington barbecue being based on shoulders. And student asked him why, and he goes, well, back in the day without refrigerated trucks and things like that, it was much easier to ship shoulders there wasn't a big hog industry in that part of the state. So it just made sense to only ship part of the hog up into the Piedmont and foothills versus trying to cook a whole hog, which was much easier to do in the low country. Always something new in Lexington.
Absolutely. And it's funny how historical nuances and things take place that kind
Yeah,
of the whole industry. So yeah,
right.
because of that at that time, we're still doing it that same way today.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. It's so funny to me too because like I've never been to a barbecue festival in my life, so hearing like all the stuff that goes into it and like the intricacies of it that like you wouldn't think of. Like there was a girl when I went to your class the other day, Strickland from North Carolina, and she was like, I can't have regular other barbecue, like I need it like thin Lexington style. I'm like,
Yeah,
I didn't
yes,
know that there were
exactly.
different styles. Of jumping back to what we were talking about at the beginning with your role with Visit Lexington, what are some of the main duties and responsibilities of yours as, the executive director? Like if you could describe some of the ways that like your tactics and attracting tourists and sort of like you were saying, perpetuating that small town feel that Lexington provides. to the visitors?
Sure. So the way that we're structured, we are a DMO, or in short, that's Destination Marketing Organization. So we are not a nonprofit. We are a government agency. We're not a part of the city of Lexington, but we are somewhat umbrellaed under that. So we adopt many of the city's policies in the way that we operate. We are entirely funded on the occupancy tax that we receive from hotels within the incorporated Lexington area. So there's a 6% occupancy tax that's levied off of all hotel room stays. And that is where all of our funds come from to operate our mission. And I kind of run us, or how I see us is we are a marketing organization. So the way I kind of view it is Lexington is our brand. And then all of our attractions, our restaurants, everything that we have to offer, those are our products that we market and build individual brands around to sell. So we kind of serve as the face of Lexington, and oftentimes we're the first contact that people will have, whether they are moving to Lexington or visiting or just passing through. We kind of serve as that face, that welcoming face to Lexington, inviting folks in. We are one of the very few, you don't see very many visitor centers anymore. That's kind of a thing that's disappearing, but luckily we have a visitor center. So we do have a guest facing brick and mortar in Lexington where we can actually be face to face with visitors and guests and market that way. So we've got, even though we're a small team of 2 people, we have different resources and landscapes that we can market in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like we were just talking about, with everything we've talked about, the population, the location of Lexington, the events in Lexington, what do you tell people about, or what do you tell people, that is great about living and growing up in Lexington? What do you enjoy the most, and how do you get more people, to maybe not just visit as tourists, but to spend more time, and potentially even try to move there?
Yeah, sure. So we kind of have like our, everybody has like their elevator pitch for Lexington, right? So we always start with barbecue. Barbecue is king. We wouldn't be where we're at today without it. So that's one of the biggest draws to Lexington currently, and I think it will be for some time to come. And I also like to use the term peacefully pleasant and quietly progressive, just because it shows that, yes, we're small town, but we are showing growth. And I think the city of Lexington does a fantastic job of balancing that act, because those are 2 very different ends of the spectrum.
Right.
Especially in today's landscape, it's very hard to keep that small town nostalgic feel while also growing and getting people to move to town. But the city does a fantastic job of that, and they have a really good understanding and a partnership of working with tourism and knowing that, okay, if we can get people into town, the more tourism we have, that's going to lower the local residents' tax. There's different ways that tourism can help a resident and vice versa. So we always say whatever's good for tourism is good for residents and vice versa. So that helps us keep a very open communication with the city of Lexington, helping us to keep that balancing act of making sure we keep that small town brand, but also showing some growth and getting some new audiences into town, whether they're here visiting or looking to move here.
Right. And I have to say, it's very forward thinking of the city. In some of the places where there actually still is a visitor center or something like that, it's often out on the outskirts of town or in a strip mall or something like that. So forward thinking of Lexington to put you in your office right there on the square next to, in the historical neighborhood of town, so everybody can find it.
Absolutely. It just made sense. Lexington is a very large, well, population wise, not so much, but geographically, it's a fairly large city, covers a area. So, of course, it made sense for us to be on Main Street, right in our uptown district. It has the most pedestrian foot traffic of anywhere else within the city. So it just makes sense. And then we're right next door to a major attraction. Conrad and Hinkle is a longtime landmark for Lexington. So we share visitors. We send each other back and forth. So yeah, it makes sense for us to be uptown. And then as we grow, we are showing some growth in our Depot District area.
Yeah.
And within an 8 to 10 year time period, we will have that daily Amtrak stop back in Lexington. So we do anticipate having some visibility and even a satellite visitor center in that area as well. So we want to be as visible as possible.
Just as a side note, from the group that I brought over to Lexington a couple of weeks ago, a student was telling me yesterday that when she goes home for Thanksgiving, her mom said let's do a mother-daughter day. What would you like to do? And she said, I want you to take me grocery shopping at Conrad and Hinkle in Lexington. And they're going from Raleigh over to Lexington just for that.
Yes. Now that is the epitome of nostalgia.
It is, right? Yeah. So to kind of circle back around to the website that you maintain, the Visit Lexington NC site, how do you see that site being used? Who are you thinking about in terms of your audience? How do you see that approach maybe evolving over time as you begin to try to reach out to a broader audience? And then once you kind of ponder that for a little bit, I'm going to come back and ask you a question, kind of the money question for this whole discussion, which is how can the Highway 64 project collaborate with you and kind of supplement or add to your website, not duplicate it. And as I've told you before, we want to make Lexington one of our model cities as a partnership for the whole project. So if you could just kind of go back to the first of the question about your website, what you see about the audience, and then we'll kind of edge over into the other stuff.
Sure. So our website is a very big tool and resource for us. It helps us reach people before they even get here. And so we see that as an extension of our visitor center. And we've actually recently, within the last 2 years, done an overhaul of our website, aiming to be more inviting, more user friendly. And now that we are in, this huge digital world that we live in now, and going, that kind of ties back to the visitor center, and the importance of that is, I think the reason so many of them are disappearing is because they're not evolving with the times. Traditional visitor centers are, they have brochures and pamphlets and maps, and that's kind of the extent of what they can do. Here in Lexington, we're trying to think outside the box and kind of evolve the visitor center along with the digital landscapes as well. So we still, to this day, I would say about 50-50 of our visitors, 50% still want that hand-in map. They want a hard copy of the visitor guide. They want hard copies of maps and brochures. But then you also have that other 50% who, no, just send me the QR code or just send me the link or let me just look it up on my phone.
Right.
So that's a balancing act that we're having to do at the visitor center. And luckily it's working out very well for us so far in that we are able to cater to both of those audiences and provide resources for both. With the website, we kind of see that as an extension of our visitor center. So a lot of the times that's where people get their first impression. If they're thinking about coming to the area, they'll Google Lexington, North Carolina, and our page is the first one that comes up. So oftentimes we're kind of a glimpse into what Lexington is. So we always want to make a good first impression there on a digital platform. I would love to see the website. As it stands right now, it's very basic in that it's very informational driven.
Right.
So there's business listings, there's links to places, and it has all the necessary information. But where I would like to see it is I would like to see our website become a destination in itself. I would like to see it be a website that people want to go visit. What are they posting now? What are they, what's the latest? So that's kind of the direction I would like to see our website go in. And then also, beyond just informative, being able to give behind the scenes glimpses into our mom and pop shops. If we can go behind the scenes at the barbecue pits and show a glimpse into that, people really love to see a peek behind the curtain. And so I think if we can use our website to kind of showcase some of those things, I think we can really remodel what the visitor center website could be.
Well, I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that one, because that's exactly the same set of goals that we have at the Highway 64 project. And I'm hoping those are some of those spaces where we can begin to collaborate. I think we've talked about the possibility of doing profiles of interesting people in Lexington, places, in a way that we can also become a destination and kind of point traffic back and forth from your site back to our site for things that highlight Lexington. And, we talked about other kinds of collaborative concepts like writing contests with local schools, things like that we could promote. You mentioned something in our meeting last time about a possible ghost tour that you're thinking about for Lexington. Could you elaborate on that and ways in which we might be able to do some cross collaboration on something like that also?
Absolutely. Yeah, we're all the time trying to brainstorm of different unique ways to bring people to Lexington. And I think anytime we do that, it's important to, again, stick to your brand and work with what you have. We never want to be the next city over. We know who we are and what we are. So we really try to look inside to see if there's first and foremost something that's here already that we can kind of take a step further. So within the last couple of years, just getting to know business owners and, being in this position and getting to know so many different people in town, we kind of started to hear a pattern of our historic buildings and historic uptown and
Yeah.
some neat stories behind them and some experiences, paranormal experiences that the owners were having. So one thing kind of led to another, and we started working with a paranormal investigation team. And they came to town, investigated some of our historic buildings here, and they were able to find some very interesting activity. And, some of our buildings date all the way back to the 1800s
Hmm.
when Main Street was still a dirt road.
Right.
There's years and years of history here, and they were able to find some really exciting findings. And that kind of gave us a platform and some evidence, if you will, to really work off of in the hopes of creating a ghost tour or a ghost walk that we can offer here, kind of an extension of our historical museum, but also as a fun attraction here in Lexington. So that is in the works, and we're very excited about that. Anything that you guys can help us do to kind of promote that and get it off the ground would be most appreciated.
That sounds excellent. And so I want to thank you for taking the time to visit with us today and be one of the first guests on our podcast. We're in the very first season of this process. I can promise you, you will see more of me and of Caden and Olivia this spring. We'll make a couple of trips over and talk to you about some of these other kinds of things. And we'll have a couple of other students to work with us on the project. And hopefully this relationship can build into something very significant.
Absolutely. We appreciate you guys reaching out to us and wanting to work with Lexington on this project. It's an honor to work with you all, and we're excited to see where the partnership goes.
Thanks so much, Morgan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you again for joining us for the From Murphy to Manteo podcast. Be sure and check out our website at highway64.net and follow our podcast on YouTube and Spotify. If you have questions or ideas for folks who might want to host on the podcast, you can email us at highway64@gmail.com. Thank you.